North America versus South America. Two continents, two very different stories. Most people assume the North is richer because it had more to work with. But the truth is actually the opposite. When the first settlers arrived, South America was the prize. It had the gold, it had the silver, and the most fertile land on the planet. On paper, it should have been the most prosperous place on earth. So, how did the North, a land of rocky soil and brutal winters, end up as a global superpower, while the South stayed trapped in a cycle of struggle? Today, we are diving into the hidden history of these two continents to find out the exact moment the scales tipped. We aren't just looking at money, we are looking at the hidden blueprints that were already drafted 400 years ago and still control our lives today. Geography is the silent architect of history. Most people think nations solely succeed because of hard work, but sometimes the land itself gives you a 400-year head start. To understand why North became a superpower while the South struggled, we have to look at the hidden factors, some visible to the naked eye and others silently giving one side a competitive edge that money just can't buy. To understand the advantage in action, you only have to look at the map of the United States. In the heart of the continent lies the Mississippi River system. In the 1800s, this wasn't just water, it was a natural conveyor belt. But calling it a river doesn't do it justice. It was a geographical miracle. You see, most of the world's great rivers are kind of broken. The Nile flows through a desert. The Siberian River flows through a frozen Arctic. But the Mississippi, it is the largest network of interconnected navigable rivers on the planet. It's a 14,000-mile liquid highway that connects the most fertile farmland on earth. All you need to do is grow your crops, load them onto a barge, and let gravity float them straight down to the Gulf of Mexico, and from there out to the entire world. That competitive advantage means $1 billion in savings. Now you might wonder, what about the Amazon? It is the largest river on earth, but it never gave South the same advantage. Unlike the Mississippi, the Amazon is choked by 2 million square miles of dense jungle. Even worse, the soil in the Amazon basin is surprisingly nutrient poor and nearly impossible for large scale farming. The Mississippi invited the world in, the Amazon kept the world out. While the North was using its rivers to connect to the globe, the South was dealing with the Andes. This isn't just a mountain range, it is the longest continental mountain system on the planet. To put that in perspective, the Himalayas might be taller, but the Andes, stretching 4,300 miles, are nearly 3 times longer. Imagine a jagged wall of rock slicing through 7 different countries, from Venezuela at the top all the way down to the tip of Chile. It's a fortress of stone that makes it a nightmare to move anything. Let's crunch some numbers. Imagine you're a farmer in the 1820s. In the north, you spend $100 to float your grain to the ocean. In the south, crossing the Andes and pushing through muddy roads, that same trip cost you $1,200. Economics tells us that water transport is 12 times cheaper than land. That $1,100 difference didn't just vanish, it stayed in the farmer's pocket. It built banks, the schools, and the factories. We call this capital accumulation. The North was born with a multi-billion-dollar transportation network already built, already paved, and best of all, completely free to use. Even today, in 2026, one single barge on the Mississippi carries as much cargo as 70 semi trucks. The geographical advantage never stopped. And then there are microbes. In the north, the Great Frost acts as a biological reset button, killing off parasites every winter. But the south lives in the tropical belt, a high mortality zone where malaria and yellow fever reigned for centuries. Historically, this created a short term mindset. European empires didn't come to the south to build a future, they came to grab the gold and leave before they got sick. The north was a place you went to live, the south was a place you went to just extract. Geography forced the North to become one unified massive market. It forced the South to shatter into isolated competing nations. But the landscape was just the stage. The real drama started when the empires began building systems to fit their surroundings. One was built for growth, the other was built for extraction. And that brings us to the most controversial part of the story, the blueprint of an empire. Geography gave North America the head start, but a head start only matters if you have the right rules to win the race. To understand why North became a superpower while the South struggled, we have to look at the different foundations laid by the empires that settled them. When the Europeans arrived, they didn't just bring ships and weapons, they brought two completely different ways of organizing a society. The story begins in the south. When the Spanish arrived in 1492, they didn't find a wilderness, they found a gold mine of existing power. They discovered massive centralized empires like the Aztecs and the Incas. Their strategy was effective and brutal: capture the chieftains by taking over the person at the top. They immediately controlled millions of people at the bottom. They installed an extraction model, a system designed to vacuum silver and gold out of the land and ship it straight to Europe. In this system, wealth was concentrated in the hands of a tiny elite at the top, while the people at the bottom had no rights and no way to build their own future. Now look at the North. In 1607, the British arrived in Jamestown, Virginia. They tried to copy the Spanish model exactly. They wanted to kidnap a local leader and force the population to feed them while they hunted for gold. But the North was a different world. The local leaders weren't emperors of giant cities. They led mobile, decentralized societies that could simply vanish in the woods. The British couldn't capture the system because there was no throne to seize. For years, the colony was a disaster. People were starving, and the British tried to force their own settlers to work under brutal military regime. It was a total failure. By 1618, the Virginia Company was on the brink of bankruptcy. They realized that the extraction model, ruling by force, was a death sentence to the North. To save their investment, they had to offer a bribe to get people to stay. They launched the head right system. The deal was simple. If you were a settler, the company gave you 50 acres of land for every person you brought over. This changed the DNA of the continent. For the first time, wealth wasn't just for the elite, it was for everyone willing to work. Then, in the 1619, they created the House of Burgesses, the first elective government in America. It meant that people Not just the king across the ocean had a voice in the laws they lived by. This was the birth of inclusive institutions because the North couldn't rely on a captive population. They were forced to create a society of owners. This is the hidden engine of North American prosperity. It created three pillars of wealth. First, property rights. Because the head right system, the North created a world of deeds. When a farmer owns his land, he can go to a bank, get a loan, invest in better tools. That piece of paper created a massive cycle of investment from the bottom up. In the South, land stayed in the hands of few powerful families. Without a title to the land, the average person could never grow wealth. Second, the rule of law. The House of Burgess led to a world where the law applied to everyone. If you built a business, you knew the government couldn't just seize it because you had a vote and a voice. That confidence is what makes a country rich. In the South, power remained with the caudillo, the strong man. If the leader changed, the rules change. Third, human capital. In the North, you had to read to understand your deed and participate in the government. By 1900s, literacy in the US was over 90%. In the South, the elites saw education as a threat to their control. As a result, literacy rate there stayed below 20%. The North became a garden of owners, the South became a mine of workers. The blueprint was drafted 400 years ago, but the foundation they laid are a reason one continent is building the future and the other is still fighting the past. If the 1600s were about laying the foundation, the 1800s were the ultimate stress test. This was the era of the Industrial Revolution. The spark started in Great Britain with the steam and iron, but it didn't stay there. In the late 1700s, the North stole the blueprints. Men like Samuel Slater, who memorized the designs of the British textile mills and brought them to America, imported the revolution. But here is the mystery. Why did the North take those British machines and build a superpower while the South took the same machines and stayed a resource colony? The answer is incentives. In the North, the ownership code created a massive middle class. But importantly, it created the patent system. In the 1790s, the US government did something radical. They made it easy and cheap for a common citizen to own an idea. Think about why this matters. If a mechanic in a northern shop found a way to make a machine 10% faster, the patent meant he owned that improvement. He could sell it, he could license it, and he could get rich. This turned every citizen into a potential inventor. Innovation wasn't just for the elites in universities, it was happening in every garage, every farm. In the North, the law protected the product of the mind. But in the South, the extraction code hit a wall. The elites who ran the massive estates weren't interested in patents or innovation. Why spend money on an expensive steam engine when you have a captive, low wage workforce to do the labor for you? In an extraction economy, you don't grow by inventing, you grow by taking. The elites actually saw industrialization as a threat. If you build factories, you create cities. If you create cities, you create an educated working class that eventually asks for a vote. To the southern elites, a patent for a new machine wasn't an opportunity, it was a risk to their control. This created the commodity trap. South America became the world's grocery store. Brazil exported coffee, Chile exported nitrates, and Argentina exported beef. They were incredibly good at it. And for a while, the money was massive, but they weren't building machines, they were just selling commodity. By 1900s, the divergence was complete. While North was learning how to build the future, the South was becoming dependent on selling the raw materials of the past. When the price of coffee or silver dropped in Europe, the entire South American economy collapsed. The Great Divergence wasn't an accident of technology, it was a result of two blueprints, one designed to protect the ideas of many, and one designed to preserve the power of the few. If the foundations were laid 400 years ago and the gap exploded during the Industrial Revolution, why hasn't the South caught up? We live in an era of instant information and global trade. In 2026, the blueprint should be easy to rewrite. But the reality is that South America isn't just fighting poverty, it is fighting an institutional hangover. The extraction model of the 1600s didn't disappear, it evolved. In the North, the system was engineered to protect citizens from the government. In the South, the system was engineered to protect the government and elite from the citizens. This has created the modern struggle. Three barriers that act as a permanent wall to prosperity. The first barrier is corruption as a requirement. In an extraction economy, the goal of attaining power isn't to build the nation, it is to gain control of the vacuum. When a system is designed to siphon wealth from the bottom to the top, corruption is the malfunction. It is the very logic upon which the machine was built. This is why, even today, billions intended for progress often vanish in the hands of the few. The second barrier is the resource trap. This is the great irony of the South. Being rich in nature often makes a country poor in innovation. When an economy is structurally tied to export of raw materials, oil, copper, or soy, it loses the incentive to build anything else. This is the difference between resource and complexity. Think of it this way, a resource is a single ingredient like a pound of copper. Anyone can dig it up. Complexity, however, is the ability to take that copper and turn it into a microchip or a medical laser. Complexity requires thousands of people with different skills, engineers, designers, and lawyers working together under a fair system of laws. While the North had spent a century building a web of complexity, the South remains caught in a cycle of selling its ingredients. The North is selling the finished machine, the South is still selling the raw metal. The third barrier is the cost of entry. In the North, starting a business is often a matter of few clicks. In the South, the old gatekeeper mentality remains. Complex bureaucracies and endless permits makes it nearly impossible for a regular person to become an owner. It is the old blueprint in a new disguise, maintaining a society of workers rather than a society of entrepreneurs. So, is the South's fate sealed? The blueprints of the past are heavy, but they are not permanent. We are seeing a new generation of leaders across South America attempting to crack the code, pushing for transparency, digital rights, and a true rule of law. So, where does that leave us? We often look at the world and see winners and losers, assuming that one side simply worked harder than the other. But the history of the Americas proves something more profound. The North was designed as a ladder, a system meant to be climbed by anyone with an idea and a patent. The South was designed as a wall, a system built to keep wealth at the top and everyone else at the bottom. We can change the leaders, the technology, and even the currency. But until we rewrite the underlying blueprint, the machine will keep producing the same result. Because in the end, the story of these two continents isn't just about who has the wealth, it's about who the system was built for in the first place. The question for the next century is simple: can the South finally break the wall? Or is the blueprint of 1600 too strong to rewrite? Let me know in the comments. Do you think geography is destiny, or can a new blueprint change everything?